As the summer winds down, local produce is abundant around the region. Thanks to a recent rule change adopted by the Clark County Board of Commissioners, farmers will now be allowed to operate larger roadside stands to sell their crops. Recently, we sat down with Vicki from Clark County Community Development to hear how these rule changes might impact agriculture in the county.
Hello, I'm Jim Demo with Clark County Close-Up. Thank you for meeting with us.
Thank you.
Well, Vicki, first tell us what you do for community development and how you were involved in this process.
Well, I'm a planner in the land use review, and I'm the staff person that was assigned the task of rewriting the code that related to farm stands.
Okay. Now why were these rules changed by the county?
Well, it's been a rather long process. It started in 2008 when the Board of Commissioners formed a group called the Agricultural Preservation Advisory Committee. It was made up of farmers, nurserymen, horse folks, food groups, and they were charged with trying to find ways to promote and preserve agriculture in Clark County. They worked for about a year, came up with some strategies to help and assist agricultural in the county, one of which was taking a look at the zoning code to see if there might be some way that we could make changes to that would be more user-friendly to the farmers. That was then taken to the Rural Lands Task Force, who were supposed to be the ones to make specific recommendations as to what changes could be made. Through the course of that, what we learned is that the existing code that we had at that time was not very viable for the farmers. It was extremely limiting as to where farm stands could be. It was limited to the scope that they could have. And so what we had is we had primarily folks that were in the rural farm and forest zones that could have agricultural stands, but we have a lot of productive agricultural land in the urban areas that they couldn't have roadside stands. So that was not very viable. We looked at the size limitations in the farm and forest zones. They could have 300 square feet of farm stand, and in the other zones only 200 feet. What we discovered is that a lot of the farmers exceeded those size limitations, and others were having farm stands that were in areas that weren't allowed. So we tried to rectify those situations. And the last is that the farmers were limited to selling only agricultural products grown in their immediate area. It didn't take into consideration value-added products like jams, syrups, ciders, and whatnot, or incidental retail sales that might be associated with the agricultural items. And lastly, it didn't take into consideration some of the activities like corn mazes, harvest festivals.
Pumpkin launches.
Yeah, those sorts of things. It didn't take that into it. So what we did is went into it trying to address those limitations on the code.
Okay. Can you, you kind of went over some of this, but give a little bit more specifics about the rule changes and what types of structures are actually affected?
Well, one of the things that we discovered as we started through this process is that one size doesn't fit all when it comes to roadside stands. Mm-hmm. We have the roadside stands that you typically think of that are your portable tents selling product, or maybe little buildings that are selling product.
So you're talking like the berry stands, for example,
berry
things
stands,
like that.
Okay. Sort of thing. They generally feature items that are primarily produced on the farm itself. Mm-hmm. They're typically more seasonal in nature, and they offer some limited, like educational tours for students and whatnot, but not a whole lot of the corn mazes and the pumpkin launches and whatnot. And they typically close down after harvest season is completed. And then we have the more notable, what we've come to call during this process, an agricultural market, which is more a larger structure. It's more permanent in nature, and they tend to operate all year round. And because of that, they tend to bring in more product, mm-hmm. because while their product is low on their farm, they bring it in from elsewhere. May bring in like watermelons from Hermiston or whatnot. Sure. So and they also sold a lot more of the processed items like the syrups and the ciders, and are a lot more involved with the agritourism activities and whatnot. Right. So what we tried to do, the first thing we did is we differentiated between the roadside stands and the agricultural markets, because the size and scope of them and the impacts of those were different. So that's what we tried to do there. We also went and broadened where roadside stands and markets both could be located. They're now can be located anywhere in Clark County, it doesn't matter, or outside city limits, but
Okay.
in our jurisdiction, they can be located in any zone where there's a farm activity located. And then I guess the other thing you could say that we did is we increased the square footage. For roadside stands, we allowed up to 1,000 square feet, which really recognizes what's happening right now out in the farm community, and then it allowed a little extra space to allow the farmers a chance to grow their operation.
Okay.
And then we have the agricultural markets where we have a tiered system where they can, depending on the size of their farm operation, for instance, if it's less than 10 acres in size, they can have up to 4,000 square foot farm or agricultural market. If it's over 20 acres, they can go up to 12,000 square feet of market. And then once again, we've broadened the type of product that can be sold, the incidental retail sales and whatnot.
Okay, all right. Now, you talked a little bit. How did you get local farmers to discuss this?
Well, it's not hard to get them to discuss it. I had a lot of, during the course of the process, once I assumed leadership of this task, I met with farmers individually on a one-on-one, a lot of phone calls, made connections with people in the Farm Bureau, and we had meetings, several meetings throughout, where we actually, as the code was drafted, sat down and went through it line by line to get an idea of, and make changes and ever evolution, or it was an ever evolving process. I went to a seminar, from a farm to table seminar for farmers, so that I could network with them and get some ideas and make more connections with folks. And then, of course, the farmers had the right to testify at the Planning Commission hearing and the Board of Commissioners. So they were involved through it. It was a ever evolving process, but the farmers were involved up from virtually the very beginning of the process. And then you also had the APAC and the Rural Lands Task Force that had farmers representing it.
So during the public hearing, there's actually a little bit of debate there, that talking about somewhat in much larger structures.
Correct.
Now, ultimately, why was the 1,000 foot square limit chosen?
Well, basically that was to recognize what's already existing out there, as far as what the farmers have. A lot of the operations had 750 or thereabouts, and so we went with that and then increased the size to give them a little bit of expanding space. And then, of course, the markets can be considerably bigger than that, at, like I said, up to 12,000 square feet, depending on the size of the farm operation.
Now, speaking as a consumer who goes out and launches the pumpkins
Right.
and does those type of things, what can the consumer expect? What changes they might see?
Well, I think there's a couple of things. One is, I think that by making local agricultural available and increasing the area that it can be, you have more access to fresh farm produce and whatnot. One of the things I think that has gotten overlooked in this is that the agritourism activities that are available. I mean, we've been having those, but now the farmers can expand upon the agritourism activities, and that brings kids and adults from the cities out to the farm, so that they can experience, what it's like to, I guess, grow the farm and have the whole experience, rather than thinking that, farm and agricultural products come from the grocery store. And I think that's a valuable tool and helps people appreciate, just how important the farming is.
Great. In studying this issue, how has agriculture changed in Clark County over the past decade?
Well, I think that anybody that's been here a long time, and I haven't been here that long, but people can, I hear people talking throughout this process about the dairies and the berry fields and the orchards and the diversified livestock that were basically scattered throughout the county. Well, those have disappeared because of ever expanding urban growth boundaries, and they've been converted to other uses, such as housing primarily. What's happened though is, so you would look, if you took a look on the surface, it would appear that the farms have disappeared and there's not a whole lot of farming. But I think what's happened is the farmers have adapted to what's been going on. You'll find a lot more farmers on larger sized urban lots, or maybe a little smaller lots, medium-sized lots on the peripheral of the rural area. And you don't necessarily think of those areas if you're driving by as being your large-scale farm operations, but the farmers have adapted to that because they're dealing with smaller land and whatnot. They've gotten into a lot more sustainable farming to trying to promote and protect the longevity of their crop by rotating. They've changed their management techniques, and a lot of them are organic. And so when you only have a limited amount of area, they've had to adapt and promote those good farming practices. And then I guess the main one that I really didn't realize when I started that was quite as much of a growth opportunity is the CSAs, the community supported agricultural. This is where folks, it's a little different than the farm markets and the agricultural markets because people subscribe to the farm, and the farmer then supplies them throughout the year from their product and whatnot. You don't have much.
So you get like a box of vegetables
every
and whatever
week,
every week. Yeah.
And so, what was surprising to me when I went out and spent a week visiting farmers, watching their operations and whatnot, is that one of the community-supported agricultural farms from March until October supplied vegetables for close to 48 families and on a less than 4-acre parcel. But they plan the crops very carefully, plant them, and then the next round of vegetables replenish the soil and work with that. So it's a very important economic consideration for Clark County, and you wouldn't think of a 4-acre parcel.
As well as health, getting that fresh produce.
Correct. And so, you wouldn't think, those are things, this one is in a little pocket of single family. It's like I say, 4 acres. You could drive by it and think it was just somebody's garden, but it is a very viable economic entity for the county. So.
And really, it seems that the internet has helped connect these people.
Right. And I think that people too, we've gotten, as a society, have gotten more that we're into health. And I go out to the farm market because I don't have the time or space or anything to do that. And so I think we've gotten much more inclined to.
Okay. Now, if people want more information about any of these agricultural rule changes, where can they go?
Well, they can go to our Clark County website, which is www.clark.wa.gov and development/development, or they can give community development a call at 397-2375, and my extension is 4178, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Well, Vicki, thank you very much for sharing your time with us.
Thank you.